Welcome everyone to the webinar. I will give everyone a minute to log on to the Zoom meeting. So please bear with us for another minute. We'll start at the half an hour sharp. All right, welcome everyone. In the upcoming webinar, we will look at the key findings of the Global Off-Grid Solar Market Report. This is a half-yearly effort between GOGLA, IFC Lighting Global, and the Efficiency for Access Coalition. This edition is a much anticipated edition due to the fact, of course, that it covers the first half of January-June 2020. Which means it is the period that covers the COVID-19 pandemic. And this has obviously impacted many sectors around the world, and also the off-grid solar sector not being an exception. To start off with, I am going to quickly launch a poll. You should see it now on your screen. We're curious to learn who our audience is that is listening to these highlights. So please fill in the poll that I've launched. In the meantime, let me just share with you that I guess maybe now more than ever, there's simply too much data in this publication and in this report to cover it all in a 1-hour webinar. So instead, what we've done, we've picked trends and updates that we think you will find interesting. So our expert panel will share those with you, and we will also allow plenty of time to answer any questions that you might have on the report or on whatever we just shared. And then in addition to our panel, we have invited Russell Storm, who is the Global Head for Energy Access at IFC. And he will share a higher level perspective on the trends that we have spotted through this data collection. All right, I hope that everyone has had a chance to join on the poll. I am going to close the poll and pull up the results. The majority, it's really great to see, are actually companies that are active in the sector, and then the primary focus being off-grid solar generation, so solar home systems and lanterns. And then other than that, there's about 15% of investors in DFIs and 10% of appliances companies. All right. With that, I think so it's good for us and for our panelists to know who they're talking to, and it's also good for us to know who we're catering this webinar to. There's some very brief housekeeping rules that I would like to share. That I hope that I think many of you already know or are familiar with. All the audience will be muted and stay muted. So the Q&A session that we will hold at the end will go through the Q&A box that you can find at this little Zoom control panel that's usually at the bottom of your screen somewhere. So drop your questions that you have throughout the webinar. You can drop those there. If you have a question for a specific panelist, please mention their name. If you have technical problems, just notify me via the chat function and I'll see if I can help out. Just know that the session and the proceedings, so the session will be recorded and the proceedings will be shared afterwards. And I'll be very, very diligent in sticking to a hard stop after 1 hour. Then with that, I will waste no more time in Russell, I'm going to give you the floor. It's really great that you can join us to share your insights and your thoughts. So please, if you can unmute and show camera, then
Thank you. Can you see me and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Eveline. This is an interesting moment we're in. We're in uncharted territory, and the shared experiences that all of humanity has had during the first half of 2020 in many ways has been unprecedented. We're all navigating an extraordinary moment and taking stock of our companies, our institutions, our nations, even our economic order. And we're looking to fully understand the impact that COVID has had. And this is absolutely true for the off-grid solar industry. Over the past 10 years, Lighting Global, and now led by Gogla, have partnered to produce the semi-annual off-grid solar sales report. In aggregate, these reports have been telling the story of the market's dynamic evolution. We've seen technological innovations, business model developments, government policy shifts, investments coming in, locust swarms and droughts that the market has had to navigate, and now the pandemic. It's presenting this unprecedented challenge, and it's substantially altered the market's course. It's testing a young industry, still a young industry, and that industry is showing resilience because it's an industry based on innovation and an amazingly committed community of entrepreneurs and the stakeholders that have created it. When we released the Biennial Market Trends Report in Nairobi in February at the Biennial meeting, we celebrated a moment where the market had grown to $1.8 billion a year. And we'd reached 420 million people with modern solar energy. We were in position and being counted upon to actually be the driver to attain Sustainable Development Goal 7, which is universal energy access by 2030. We needed 13% year-on-year growth in our market to achieve that ambitious goal, playing our role in a diverse delivery of energy. Just after the conference, though, COVID spread into the off-grid markets. Just before governments began their shutdowns, the markets experienced this burst of sales. And anticipating shutdowns, people moved really quickly to secure reliable, affordable energy in order to provide information, connectivity, and entertainment they would be needing during the shutdown. And therefore, we saw record sales reported by many companies at that time in March. Then the shutdowns hit, and nearly 800 million people entered a lockdown without electricity. What had been a really promising first quarter hit a COVID wall, and quarter two presented an existential threat to the industry. 81% of companies experienced a substantial fall in sales in that quarter compared to 2019 quarter two. The impacts on the market have really varied greatly by country, but overall, we can say that product distribution was impeded by lockdowns that blocked sales and service. Recognizing the importance of services enabled by this industry, some governments declared off-grid solar to be an essential service that enabled operations to continue in those markets and minimize the impact somewhat. Supply chains were disrupted as ports were shut down. Liquidity challenges impeded companies' ability to restock. China's shutdown delayed the whole production runs. And then there's 1.6 billion people in the informal sector, workers who experienced a 60% decline in in income. This really intensified the struggle to survive for a quarter of humanity. And these are the people that are the primary focus of this sector. Consumer surveys focusing on this population indicated that people were in a position of choosing between basic necessities, including food, and very often they were selecting to keep their solar on. The pay-go sector in all of this has proven to be an essential player in this environment. The industry brought its characteristic innovation to the moment. For example, by leveraging customer connectivity that underpins these businesses, pay-go companies actually strengthen the relationship, proactively reaching out to their customer base in the crisis. And 82% of their customers report satisfaction with the pay-go company's communications and commitment. The pay-go sector's response was really quite tangible. 63% of the pay-go companies provided grace periods to customers, and 22% additionally adapted the repayment structure to accommodate customer needs. The pay-go solar platform also demonstrated adaptability. Some companies pivoted and started offering services to health clinics to keep them going. PayGo call centers became this essential provider of healthcare information to customers. And then some companies leveraged that platform and those customer contacts to begin to offer insurance products to meet the need of the moment. Overall, in sum, the impact has really been substantial on the sector. 26% global sales fell during the semester that ended June 30th. The global recession continues today, and so we will see further impacts in the next semester reports. As you'll hear today, the impact has not been evenly felt across countries. Some have fared better than others. Sector-wide impact on payments to PayGo by customers is really not clear yet. We know PayGo is a great enabler and people have kept their contacts as much as possible, but non-performing loans we're not exactly sure about. Sales impacts has really varied by product type, and interestingly, simple solar lights that don't have phone charging really took the biggest hit, and perhaps this reflects the painful impact on the poorest customers, but it also reflects, I think, the relative importance of communications during a lockdown and people's need to recharge phones. The still young industry really remains vulnerable. Indications are that the market-leading companies operating in multiple markets fared relatively well, while smaller distributors and retailers who are poorly capitalized, have the shortest runways, and often have difficulty weathering the storm. The stakeholders, the donors and impact investors and development partners who've supported the sector to date have really circled the wagons, recognizing the essential nature of this sector for achieving development goals, including SDG 7. They've circled the wagons, coordinated technical assistance response, and also financial response. And the Energy Access Relief Fund, we expect, believe it or not, after great difficulty, to be stood up and functioning by the new year. So finally, as we emerge from COVID-19, reflecting on this, we'll be somewhat leaner, but a resilient off-grid solar sector that's going to continue to play a central role in reaching SDG 7, but also building back better the economy that's taken such a great hit globally. This off-grid solar industry is the foundation for green infrastructure that will be essential for an inclusive, sustainable, and more resilient global economy. So that's my intro for you, and I'll bring it back to you, Evelyn.
Thanks so much, Russell. That's really, I think, quite a powerful overview of the impact that COVID has on the sector, and a powerful message of the importance of the sector for sure. I'm very happy that you will stay with us through the Q&A. So if anyone has a question for Russell, you can submit it in the Q&A box for consideration. Then let me move swiftly to introducing the content team of the report. They will make up the panel that is this webinar. We have Sylvia, who is Gogla's data specialist and has been leading on this data collection effort for a couple of years now. There's Salman on behalf of IFC Lighting Global, Andrew representing Energy Savings Trust, and McKenna from CLASP, and those two last organizations coordinate the Efficiency for Access Coalition. So they have all picked their highlights from the data, which we will share with you in the upcoming half an hour. And at the end of their highlights, we will have that Q&A session. I will be monitoring the question box. So if you have a question, please mention their name and ask. Sylvia, over to you.
Great, thanks, Evelyn, and thank you, Russell, for the great introduction. He also covered already like what was also one of my highlights, that definitely we did not know what to expect, how much the volumes will be, and we were surprised to see only 3 million units sold, given that the first quarter seemed to have been quite strong. But we also recognize that there's a huge difference depending on the geographies. In general, though, those were the lowest volumes recorded since 2014, so it was really strong messaging there for us. And also we sort of did a back of the envelope calculation to see how many million people were not able to benefit from off-grid solar because of that reduction in sales, and we estimated that to be 5 million people, which is also a very strong message on the importance of off-grid solar. But then, of course, as I said, differences were made between geographies, between countries even. Here in this slide, you see a bit of the difference that we saw between the main regions, which were East Africa and South Asia. And I'll comparing mostly with the first half of the previous year, because, for example, in East Africa, we do see a very strong seasonal pattern for which the second half of the year is stronger. So it's more meaningful to make draw comparisons with the first half. So in that sense, with East Africa and also West Africa and Central Africa, which is not on this graph, we did see small decreases, but not as big as we would have expected them to be. And there were also differences between cash and pay, as we will see later. And definitely the greatest impact was shown in Asia, with South Asia continuing its decline. It already started from the beginning of 2018, mostly due to the situation in India, its major market. And we did see a 57% decrease, which was definitely hitting hard also the global sales as they contribute to those. In Middle East, instead, we did see again the first half of the year being stronger, given that's when most of the bulk purchases for humanitarian aid happened, mostly of lanterns with mobile charging. However, also there was a hit compared to the previous year, so we didn't see the same kind of volumes. As I mentioned, we were very happy and surprised to somewhat extent also to see West and Central Africa, more nascent market, to sort of stay put and keep the sales that we saw in the past rounds. We were happy about that, but also when digging into the under the surface, we saw that there were very large differences between countries, that also was Russell was pointing at. So I think for this first insights, really the takeaway for us was how many people who did not access off-grid solar because of the reduction in sales. So it's not just about business, it's also about all the impact that these sales create, and also the difference between regions. So with that, I will pass it on to the next panelist.
Salman, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Sylvia. And Evelyn, and hello everyone as well. So again, I think Russell pretty much summarized what we saw across the board in terms of the impact of COVID, and also Sylvia kind of gave a really great overview of what has happened in the different regions. For my insight, I think what really caught my eyes was the fact that while the impact has been there for all product categories, but the business model definitely has had an impact on the level of effect that COVID has had on the sales volumes. So again, cash sales in this round has been around 2 million, and it has been 35% decrease if we compare to the last round. And for pay-go sales, however, the volume is around 1 million this time. So from 1.19 million in the last round. So it definitely, and if I compare to the first half of 2019, it's only a 1% decrease actually, because it was around 1 million at that time too. So I think for me, that was really interesting to see that, the business model providing or kind of insulating the degrowth, or kind of making the blow a bit softer or milder. So that was really interesting. But at the same moment, it was also good to see the composition of pay-go in the different product categories. So for example, we have been seeing in the last few rounds that, pay-go sales has been increasing for portable lanterns or for solar home systems. So I really wanted to kind of present to you guys that, what is the composition ratio for pay-go in these different categories, and how has COVID kind of impacted that. And what we found was that, out of nearly 1.13 million portable lanterns that were sold, 22% was sold through pay-go. So even in the market where everything was decreasing, it seems that consumers with their lower income has still been kind of gravitating towards pay-go. It also kind of makes sense because of their reduced income. It shows that even with the reduced income, the need for energy, the need for being connected with their relatives and everything is high. So that was really interesting. When we look at the multi-light systems, PayGo is 56% of the overall, sales that happens in, and this has been pretty stable. So the ratio of PayGo has been pretty stable for multi-light systems. And for solar home systems, we have seen that, again, even though the sales has gone down, it has seen a 32% decrease if we compare to the last round. And in this round, we have sold around 560,000 solar home systems. But even then, the ratio of PayGo sold has actually increased to around 85%. So I think that gives a lot of insight as to how consumers are behaving and how PayGo is still continuing to provide a lifeline to these consumers who has been hit really hard with COVID. Even in face of declining sales, PayGo is a way out for these people to have access to energy. So that's my, I think, first insight. And yes, moving on to the next panelist.
All right, Macarena, go ahead. You might have to unmute yourself. Unfortunately, we cannot hear you.
Is this better?
Yes, thanks so much.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that, everyone. So I was going to say, this is the fourth round that we've collected appliance sales data, and we're continuing to get a really good picture of what the market is doing in this space. It is a complicated picture, given that, we are still in the early days of kind of getting this data. And as we continue to grow the number of companies reporting, we'll get a clearer and clearer picture. But really, in general, we did see a decrease in sales volume, echoed again by the sentiment shared by Sam and by Sylvia and also by Russell. The crisis really has led to kind of a contraction in the market, and this is also reflected in appliance sales. But the picture is a little bit more nuanced, and I think we need to kind of dig a little bit deeper when it comes to the appliances. So for example, with fans, we saw a slight increase, but this really isn't like an absolute increase because of the kind of pattern that we've already observed in South Asia, particularly in Bangladesh and Pakistan, where in the first half of the year, we get all these huge bulk sales orders, which kind of artificially inflate the sales values. So if we compare with the first half of last year, then actually we do see that decrease following the same trend as the other appliances. For TVs also, there was a decrease, but that was relatively less sharp than we would have expected, and really even less sharp than, for example, the solar home system decrease. And that's interesting because companies are anecdotally telling us that in this time of crisis and when everyone is kind of plunged into not knowing what to expect, access to information and entertainment were really important for people. So we could see that, that is really reflected in the way that the TV sales have gone. For solar water pumps, the drop was really sharp. Of course, in the previous collection period, we had this huge government tender in South Asia that inflated the numbers. But even given that, all our other data and the amount of work that's going on in the sector in solar water pumps, for us would have suggested maybe some stability, or maybe to start to see the growth that we have been projecting in other bits and pieces of work to start reflecting. But seeing that really didn't reflect was not as we had anticipated. And that could really point to other systemic issues and other concerns that we need to address when it comes to items like solar water pumps, such as awareness, and obviously the issue of affordability. And we'll dive deeper into refrigerator units a bit later, but here's where we saw sort of the smallest decrease. And in even some segments, there was some increase. For example, in pay-as-you-go fridges saw an increase in sales. And that could be a little bit because of the amount of participation we leverage, different companies who are reporting different kind of products. But even given that, I think it's a nice kind of silver lining or like a nice good news message that kind of showing that latent demand for refrigerator units. And in a time where they could potentially be seen as an essential appliance. Seeing that there's latent demand if financing is possible really is super interesting, and also kind of echoes that idea that solar home systems, the larger ones, are starting to see also an increase in pay-as-you-go, and that is reflecting in their appliances too. So just kind of trying to give you this more nuanced pictures of the appliance space, even given the decrease in sale that we've seen.
Thanks so much, McKenna. Moving to Andrew.
Thanks, McKenna. So I'm going to dive a bit deeper into one of our appliance categories, which is TVs, and some interesting trends which we're starting to see throughout these rounds of data collection is related to the sizes of TVs which are being sold. So the majority of the TVs which we've recorded sales for this round are falling into the larger categories, and we think that that's mostly due to efficiency gains. So the power consumption difference between smaller TVs and larger TVs is actually quite minimal now, and people are seeing that the larger TVs therefore are better value for money, and there's still more of a demand for those. There's been decreases in all size categories, however, except for the extra large TVs, which have remained stable throughout. I mean, the decreases, has been highlighted by McKenna, have been less sharp than we'd expected, which is largely due to the demand for TVs for the access to information, news and entertainment, potentially positively impacted by COVID. We think that the extra large TVs, the sales of those remaining stable is likely a reflection of demand from people with higher disposable incomes, and potentially a combination of that and the COVID factor could explain why the sales have remained stable. This is also the first round where we're starting to see data of appliances sold bundled with solar home systems, and that's following recent upgrades to the data collection methodology. It's provided some interesting data. So for example, for TVs, we can see that 80% are sold bundled with a solar home system. And these larger investments are likely to require some consumer financing. That's backed up by some research done by the Efficiency for Access Coalition in Nigeria, which show that 10% of households could afford TVs without consumer financing, whereas it goes up to 40% if consumer financing options are available. Lastly then, on TVs, we've seen that larger TVs are less likely to be bundled with solar home systems. We think this could be due to companies selling more expensive and larger TVs as an additional product to consumers after they've proven their creditworthiness and their ability to pay through mechanisms like PayGo. Back to you, Sylvia.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, McKenna and Salman. It's all very interesting. And for my second insights, I decided to handpick one that we discussed also within the Gogla team and with Namori, our person in Senegal, at great length, and it was the West Africa sales trajectory. Because we looked at it from what I presented in my first insight, and we said, oh, it's roughly stable. That's kind of good news. It's a market that we've seen great growth, a lot of entrants, and a lot of interest and buzz. Even looking at our investments, we saw in this first half of the year there is more investment raised there rather than East Africa, which is a very interesting trend. So, but when diving a bit deeper, we actually looked at the different markets, and here you can see in the graph I created sort of 3 buckets, and that's how I explained this also to the whole team at Gogla. And I said there were some markets that showed quite large impact, particularly Nigeria. We knew that there were going to be a strong impact there due to the lockdown measures. It was recognized as an essential service, but still, there was also some time required to get there, so the companies were still impacted. And it remained the still largest market, but it showed large decreases in new sales generated. And also the same happened in Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, and Senegal. So those were all markets that we were all looking at to continue the great growth that has been happening over the past rounds, but all of them have been more strongly impacted in the region. We did see a bit of a different story in Mali, where we did see a bit more stable sales, and Togo is a country where the government is particularly involved in the off-grid solar sector, so they offered grace periods, they supported the companies, so it was natural that the sales will remain more stable there. And then we did see a bit like some other results from Burkina Faso, Ghana, and also Sierra Leone to somewhat extent. So especially Ghana, we did see this big plunge. And when I saw that in the data, I already reached out to the companies, and most of them pointed out that there is a program due to come online the second half of this year that was importing products. So that's why we see this big jump, and we will look forward to see this program coming online. And also in Burkina Faso, we did see some bulk procurements there as well, particularly of lanterns. It could be that they're connected to some refugee camps as well. And in Sierra Leone, we continue to see a growth. So I don't think there was any particular reason there, but it seemed that the market is being very conducive in the past rounds. And we just look forward to continue to see the growth and see what happens in the market. So this is the picture, a bit more mixed picture, nuanced picture that we saw in West Africa compared to other regions. So I hand it over to Salman.
Salman, off you go.
Thank you. Yep. Right. For a second, I thought it was my internet acting up. So again, thank you, Sylvia. And again, I'll also, for the interest of time, go through this a bit quicker. For my second insight, one of the things that was happening as the COVID crisis was unfolding was that we were kind of looking at the different surveys that were being done on end consumers. And we had, as Russell had also said in the beginning, that we saw that many of the consumers were saying that the burden of repayment has increased. We saw many of them also saying that their financial condition has gotten worse. I think at the last iteration of one of the reports, one that was conducted by 60 decibels, and it was reported that I think around 84% of the end consumers had said that their financial condition had gotten worse. And of course, around 70% plus had said that their income has actually decreased. So in a situation like this, we normally expect, or as the sales data collection was happening, we had expected that we will see consumers buying smaller systems in more numbers than, of course, the bigger ones, because they have lower income, and in certain cases their expenses has increased or even decreased because they were spending less. So of course, the spending on energy products was supposed to, or we had thought that it would go down, but we saw pretty much a different kind of scenario. We saw that it was actually the portable lanterns that saw the largest absolute decrease, and of course solar home systems, while that had decreased, did not decrease at such an extent. And when looking at the drop, where did it happen, we see that East Africa and South Asia kind of accounts for the largest of these drops. And we see that some of the key geographies like Kenya and Ethiopia, which again had witnessed locust infestation, floods, and a lot of other macroeconomic situations as well, and you'll find a lot of them in the report as well. So that had caused some of the key geographies to not be able to sell as much of the portable lantern products. At the same moment, for West Africa, I think Sylvia already covered that there was some bulk purchase for which the sales had gone up, and the same thing was observed in MENA. Other than that, for South Asia, we found that India had kind of registered a pretty large degrowth. But again, for India, we have been seeing over the last few rounds that the sales numbers had been decreasing. But again, due to COVID and its impact on MFI operations specifically, or more, we have seen that this decrease has been accelerated. Yes, I think for me, the second insight again comes to the fact that the opinion that we had that a lower income would lead to purchase of lower cost products did not really pan out, and the data is saying that that isn't necessarily the case here. So again, people comes back to the point that people have been valuing energy access much higher. So it does hold, I think, a good insight for the companies that are operating. All right.
Thanks so much, Salman. McKenna, before we jump to your next key insight, let me just share a quick reminder with the audience that you can type your questions in the Q&A box. With the restart, we might have lost a few, so please drop your questions there. Okay, McKenna, go ahead.
Thanks, Evelyn. So in this insight, I want to dive a little bit deeper into refrigeration units, because here's where we saw something that's a little bit back in the trend that we've noticed in the decrease in sales during this period. So in East and West Africa, we actually saw increases in sales of refrigerator units. And there could be a couple of reasons associated with that. And one of the reasons we think is, again, I mentioned the leveraging a few more companies who are participating in this round, but also we've had, the Global Leap RBF running in this period. And this specific RBF targets East Africa in terms of refrigerators and solar water pumps. So that could potentially also be a reason why we've seen this increase in reported sales. Now it's, the RBF is still continuing. So it's we're just kind of wanting to see whether that will be borne out over time, or whether this was, maybe kind of a spike at the beginning of that results-based financing period. And obviously, given the number of companies we have, the amount of sales in absolute terms that we are talking about here, in the thousands, it's really difficult to predict whether some of these changes are trends or whether they are kind of spikes caused by specific circumstances. But we hope, like in the future, as we continue to have more companies reporting, more numbers being reported, then we can kind of see whether these trends are being borne out. The picture in Asia is quite different. The sales of refrigerators remain low. Typically, we've seen in previous data collection periods that these sales are linked to institutional bulk purchases. So whenever one of those comes online, then we get a spike. But then the rest of the period, the sales kind of go back to lower numbers. I think also another thing to note here is, I think we all understand the essential nature of a refrigerator, and in a pandemic where food insecurity is becoming an issue, having a fridge in the home is kind of going up the priority scale. And I think it'll be interesting to see in the next collection period whether this gets borne out, especially balanced against the economic crisis that we know a lot of people will face during the pandemic. So a couple of things to watch as we wait to see what the sales figures look like in the next period, and really encouraging all those companies that we saw at the beginning, represented in this conversation, to supply this data so that we're able to kind of share these trends more holistically and more robustly with the wider sector. Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, McKenna. So we're going to take a look at a bit of a regional comparison of fan sales. So looking at the two largest markets, which are South Asia and West Africa. You can see from the graphs below that there is a significant difference between the numbers of sales in South Asia and the second largest market. And there's also differences in the types of fans being sold across those markets. So just diving into South Asia first off, this continues to show a seasonal pattern of sales where bulk purchases are made at the start of the year, and then the distributors sell them to the end customers throughout the year and only resupply their purchases when they've run out of sales. The first half of 2020 shows that trend, although it's much, much reduced due to the impacts of COVID. This pattern's not seen in the West Africa market, although we are still yet to carry out more data collection to see how the trends might pan out there. We can see in West Africa that sales have fallen quite sharply since the previous round. And again, that's likely to do with the impact of COVID. So looking at the different types of fans sold, we can see that West Africa favors table fans and then pedestal fans with no sales of ceiling fans, whereas the trend is slightly reversed in South Asia with high numbers of ceiling fans and then lower pedestal, and then table fans being the lowest of the three. We can also see that 93% of fans sold in West Africa have been sold bundled with a solar home system, whilst it's only 2% in South Asia, which is where cash sales really dominate. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. Actually, maybe just thanks already to all the panelists for being incredibly concise and clear and you know, giving your insights and your highlights. I think we can move to the Q&A session. So another shout out to all the audience participants. Please type any questions that you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So we do already have some questions coming in. I think maybe just as a more general way to start this, this report has had a little bit of a different structure than our other reports. And Sylvia, I was wondering if you would like to share a little bit more on how it's structured this time around.
Yes, especially for those that may have read that consistently throughout the last few rounds. This time we really thought to structure it a bit different way, because we heard that companies and in general investors prefer to read it by region. So we did, and also to read more a bit about countries. So we had very small paragraph for each countries normally, and also we sort of looked at more technology types. So first all the lighting sales and then all the appliances sales. And, you know, we heard also from the Gogla team itself that they prefer to read it through saying, oh, I want to know everything about West Africa. I want to look at a more holistic picture. So it was with great effort from everyone, and also working together with the ACE staff teams in countries, with the World Bank and country teams. And everyone put a lot of effort in getting very, very detailed insights for the countries and looking at how the lockdown and the pandemic act in each country. So we hope that you appreciated the new structure. We're always happy to receive feedback on this. If you did strongly prefer the one from last rounds, please do reach out and tell us. We do want to put out a publication that's very useful for everyone. But I liked it very much. I find it a bit more easy also to read through back also once it's published.
Cool. Thanks, Sylvia. There's two quite specific questions, and I think Salman and McKenna, I'll share those with you. So Salman, there's one very specific question on what defines a portable lantern. Maybe just to one quick note is that we have a very extensive methodology and definition section also in the report, but maybe just to highlight now a little bit how is that defined?
Sure, Evelyn. So again, a single lantern or a portable lantern is basically a single light solar lantern that may have integrated panel. The wattage of these systems do not exceed 3 watt peak as per the way that Gogla and Lighting Global we classify this. So a portable lantern would either be just a single lantern, or it might be able to provide the service of charging a mobile phone. And in terms of access capacity, it would be able to give partial tier 1 access, or full tier 1 access to one person or more. So I think that is how a portable lantern is defined or kind of classified in this report, and also for all the other reports for Gogla and Lighting Global.
Exactly, we harmonize as much as possible. Huh? There was another question, and McKenna, I think this one goes to you, because you also showed that insight on how many solar water pumps were sold. How robust is the data around the collection of solar water pumps? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, and I mean, the first thing I would like to say is really refer folks to that part of the report that has the definition, because when we're talking about solar water pumps, we're really not talking about the entirety of the kind of spectrum of solar water pumps. And there is a massive spectrum all the way from a really small pump that would serve, let's say, 1 acre, one family, 1 acre, all the way to like really huge industrial pumps. And all those, as long as they're operated with solar PV, are solar water pumps. But in our definition, we really want to target them to specific use cases that are for smallholder farmers. And we have a size range that we look at. And so for that size range, for those end users, the data is pretty good. It's really a lot of data. Companies that are very active in the space, we've tried to capture pretty much most of the companies that we know are active in the space. We know that in regions such as South Asia, where there's so many more players, maybe we might have a little bit of kind of a data hole there, a bit bigger. But in East Africa, for example, West Africa, I think the data is quite good. All this to also say that obviously the more companies we have, the better the data we have. So please do give us that data to just increase that robustness.
Thanks. McKenna, I actually want to stick with you just a little bit because there is a follow-up question. If there is anything you can share in around the declining solar water pump sales, and it's more a question on what do you think the sector needs and what kind of measures should be tackled there?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, we really were expecting, or many of our models are projecting some growth in the solar water pumping space. So at least, some significant push upwards. And not seeing that is quite worrying for us. And we think there are a couple of reports that have come out this year that are trying to suggest a different approach to solar water pumping, perhaps an approach that involves more aggressive financing, up to and including subsidies, more creative resource-based financing, anything to ease that affordability burden, because with the solar water pumps, really it's a trifecta of affordability, then awareness for the consumer, and then access to water. And access to water is a big one that we need coordination within the sector. We need coordination with the agriculture sector, with the water sector. And then the awareness, consumer awareness, I think is something that, is kind of could be in the hands of government, could be in our hands, even as third parties, to kind of have this broader messaging to consumers about the value and the productivity benefits of solar water pumps. And finally, the affordability question is to investors, to government actors who have a lot to see, a lot to gain actually from increased food production in a country, for example. So I'd look to all those three as the barriers that are really holding down this sector and things that we can kind of push the lever on to increase some of these numbers.
Very clear. Thanks so much, McKenna. Sylvia, so you have highlighted all the West Africa trends, or what we saw there, and the differences between the different countries. So there's a question on how is this looking for East Africa? Have all countries kind of like decreased from the previous round or from the the comparable round on the year before?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was a battle between which one of the two consider, and definitely in this time West Africa won the battle. On East Africa, and it was definitely less nuanced. Most of the countries saw decreases. That was also to be expected, as lockdowns in general using the stringency index were stronger, so we were expecting that. In general, we did see only one different story in East Africa. We did see an increase in Rwanda sales, but that was very much due to a situation because there's been the new regulation in Rwanda that blocked the import of products that had less than 2 lights for the consumers, and the Lighting Global team did a very marvelous job there to work with the government to change that and to make sure that also the import of lanterns, products that have 1 point of light, as someone was explaining before, were able to be imported in Rwanda. So there were a lot of systems that were kind of stuck, and then they were released and they were capable of entering this first half year. So the increase there was mostly due to this. We were traced it back to this. So we cannot cannot really talk about an increase in the market, right? So it's a bit of a different, we were able to unlock a part of the market thanks to the great work on country. And then the only other situation was Mozambique, which is again bulk purchases, where we did see an increase there, but those are fluctuating over time, so I wouldn't talk about an increase. All the other countries did see decreases.
Thanks. There's two questions on fans. Andrew, I believe that was you, right? Very good. So there is a question around, are the fans that we're collecting, are they all AC or are they all DC? That's one question. And then the other question is there's data on the fan sales in sub-Saharan Africa, and it looks to be pretty low compared to Asia. So what does that mean? Is there a difference across the regions in terms of what consumers prefer? Is there, or are there maybe like other issues like regulation issues, transport issues? Do you have any insights that you can share here?
Sure, yeah. So taking the first question on DC and AC. So the majority of appliance data that we collect is for DC appliances. And anecdotally, the prevalence of ceiling fans in South Asia is due to a more mature market for AC products, which have then diversified to start producing DC alternatives. That's to meet this growing demand for off-grid appliances. The second question about the differences between regions, typically that's due to the climatic differences within South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. So it's a lot more humid and a lot wetter kind of heats within South Asian climates where the demand for ceiling fans is pushed up. And comparatively to other appliances it's a lot higher compared to demand for TVs, for example. Within sub-Saharan Africa, we've seen that in West Africa, there's also still quite a high demand. And that's because it's got a similarly humid climate compared to East Africa. So I think those are the kind of nuanced differences that we see is the climatic differences which push the demand for a certain appliance like fans above others like TVs.
I just want to add one small thing. Completely, Andrew, the geographical climatic conditions are different, but also Asia is a much maturer market where there's a lot of variety in terms of cost, in terms of diversity of products, and also higher affordability than in a lot of sub-Saharan Africa. So even in West Africa, where we might potentially see the same demand because of the climatic condition, because the market there isn't as vibrant, and we don't have as many options. It's not as affordable. Maybe this is also why we're not seeing those kind of sales.
Thanks so much both for kind of giving that more nuanced picture. Russell, there is I think a bit more of a higher level question that you might be well suited to answer, as probably also the last question of the Q&A. Do solar lantern sales in rural areas have a role in increasing renewable energy contribution in the energy mix of government policy?
Yes, absolutely. What happened is the rapid success of off-grid solar industry really overtook policy. And for years and years, governments were trying to figure out how grid extension could respond to a majority of the residents in countries that were under-electrified and were stumbling. You would see pushes around election time, but real numbers didn't really happen until the off-grid solar sector really started taking off in a big way, maybe 6 years ago. And government decided that this is the mechanism to create energy access at scale. And talking about East Africa, where the market took hold first. And what you started to see, and Tanzania was one of the first countries that were doing resource planning for electrification and starting to show off-grid solar as a substantial contributor. So if you measure in terms of kilowatt hours generation, really unsubstantial. But if you measure it in terms of actually impact on human beings and the number of people that are moving up the energy ladder, that are moving into another world of modern energy being part of their lives, it's become quite clear because of the success of this sector that policies need to enable that to happen. So during COVID, you saw off-grid solar being designated as an essential service. That's no accident. That's because government's already there and recognizing that achieving energy access in their countries and the political mandate and necessity they have to deliver on that means figuring out a way to work with this industry and recognizing that it's far cheaper and far higher quality to provide distributed solar in rural situations than anything they had done previously.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Russell. And thanks again to all our panelists. While I have everyone still on the line, before we end the webinar, I'm going to launch one final poll, which is we want to really know from you to what extent this webinar has been useful. Click on one of the options. You can either, if you have, I think, a bit more elaborate feedback, either email Sylvia or drop it in the chat box. For us, this is really important to make sure that for the next time around, we can tailor and kind of tune and fine tune our webinar so that it's as useful for the audience as possible. I think maybe also let me take this moment to thank our panelists, Sylvia, Salman, McKenna, Andrew for sharing their insights, and then Russell for delivering a great introductory and kind of like scene setting keynote. And then as a final word, thank you, the audience, for for joining us and for participating in the webinar. If you want to download the report, or if you want to know more on the impact that the products are having, you can visit one of those website links in the green and red box. And if you are interested in these data insights or in reporting your sales and you want to join the data collection, we very much welcome you to contact Sylvia. All right. I think with that, thank you so much for joining. That's it for the day. Have a great rest of the evening, afternoon, or night.
Nice job as always, Evelyn. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.